Business School today. So thank you for coming to our panel on social entrepreneurship. We have 4 great panelists here today who you'll get to hear a lot from. We have here Jed Smith, who is Managing Director of Catamount Ventures, Kristen Gross-Richmond, the founder of Revolution Foods, Peter Frickman, founder of Drip Tech, and those 2 are our social entrepreneurs, and Russ Hall, a co-founder of Legacy Ventures. So we have 2 social entrepreneurs and 2 investors, so we should get a good rounded perspective on this. My name is Gina Jorash. I'm director of the public management program here at the Business School.
You know, you should also know that Russ is an investor in my fund that's an investor in Revolution Foods, and yes, we all kind of,
Okay.
we care.
So,
How did I miss out?
Yeah.
and they'll soon be investing in Peter, I hope. So, before we get into the panel itself, I just wanted to set a little context because social entrepreneurship means different things to different people. And in fact, when they asked me to moderate this panel, I was thinking of something entirely different. So I thought I would start just by all entrepreneurs are social entrepreneurs in one way. They all create value. They all create jobs. They create products and services that hopefully the market needs. So we're not talking about, so yes, all entrepreneurs are social entrepreneurs. But social entrepreneurs create additional social or environmental value somewhere in their value chain. And so I put up here sort of where might a social enterprise create that kind of value. And this is based off Michael Porter's 7 steps in the value chain. You know, some examples might be in World of Good, some of you might be familiar with. They create social value in the value chain by sourcing products from from artisans in the third world and providing a market access to the first world for them to provide additional economic opportunities. So that's how they create social value. Social value can be created in the employment stage, not just employing people, but employing people who might otherwise not be able to get jobs, such as the disabled, incarcerated, or something like that. An example here might be the YMCA, who employs many disabled people. The social value can be created in the design part of the company, such as D-Light, a company that has created an extremely affordable light for people in very remote rural areas that don't have electricity. So they've created social value by providing a product specifically for their needs. The value can be created in the production or the delivery, such as a company providing locally grown food, which reduces the carbon footprint, or creating or producing the product in a more environmentally friendly way, such as what IKEA does in the way they produce their products to minimize waste and minimize transportation costs. The social value might be created by taking normal products and providing them to a previously underserved market, like banking for the poor, which is essentially what microfinance does. And finally, social value might just be created by donating a % of profits to nonprofit organizations. So a social enterprise might engage in any one or all or certain amounts of value creation in this value chain. And so hopefully we'll hear a little bit about what these folks are doing. And so social enterprise and social entrepreneurship covers a broad spectrum. Starting with, on the left, there's nonprofits which do mission maximization. And on the other side, there's for-profits that focus on profit maximization. And then there's sort of a gray area in the middle that might be nonprofits that have revenue streams or that otherwise operate like businesses, and for-profits that have a mission, maybe a double or triple bottom line. So for today's panel, we're primarily focused on that piece of the spectrum, which is for-profit enterprises that have a social mission. And so some of the things that we'd like to understand today on the panel are what are some of the unique challenges of running this kind of a social enterprise? What is the capital market like for them when they want to go out and raise money and grow their organization? And how might that be changing? So that's what we're going to talk about. So now for the panel, I'd like you guys to each introduce yourself. If you could tell us a little bit about what inspired you to start your venture or to start funding these kind of ventures, give a brief description of your organization, and how do you create social value? Jed.
Briefly, I'll start at the end and then go to the beginning and then come back to the end. So I currently run a venture capital fund called Catamount Ventures. We have about $225 million under management. And our primary focus, while we do some technology, is focused on investing in companies that have products or services that are better for the environment across the board, across almost every sector of the economy. And how I got there, I spent 12 years as an entrepreneur starting companies. One did well, one didn't do well, and one did really well. I learned as much from the failures as the successes. And then started doing venture capital about 10 years ago, and really feel like the only way I was able to do my job, or have been able to do my job, is because of the operating experience that I had, and having gone through the creative process of what it takes to start a company and make it work. After about 5 or 6 years of doing venture capital, mostly in the technology space, I wanted to kind of move on and save the world from doom, and I just wasn't that happy where everything was, and thought about lots of different interesting not-for-profit ideas and concepts. And every time I kept bumping in was like, well, I'm going to have to raise money to do that, and I'm going to have to get the right people to do that. And then I saw what a lot of the venture capitalists were doing in 2003 and 4 and 5, investing in alternative energy, and I felt like, that's just one piece of the puzzle, that the issues around sustainability hit every single sector of our economy, whether it is food, energy, water, air, building materials, everything. If people think about, the impact of their purchasing decisions, and so therefore have been spending the last 5 years looking at all of the different opportunities that are, in my mind, very exciting, both from a capitalist perspective as well as from a impact on the world.
Thank you. Kristen.
Great. I'm Kristen Richmond. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Revolution Foods. Revolution Foods seeks to transform the way we feed our students nationwide. So we started with the goal of bringing healthy, fresh, nutritious, delicious, affordable meals to schools. And what inspired me to do that? Well, I have a mixed background. I actually started in finance and then moved to education. And I spent a lot of time in schools, both abroad and here in California, and mostly schools serving underserved students, and would constantly, I'm a pretty entrepreneurial spirit, and would constantly be asking, what are some of your greatest needs? And the number of times that I heard access to decent, not even healthy, fresh, but just decent food options in schools. I think the most defining moment was when I heard a teacher at a KIPP school say, I just feel like a flat-out hypocrite, because I sit in a classroom and I teach my kids one thing around how to take care of their body, how what they eat fuels their wellness, their academic achievement, how they're performing out there on the sports field. And then we go down to the lunchroom and I'm serving them Taco Pockets and Cheetos. And I don't like feeling like this. No one likes feeling like this. There's got to be a better solution. And that, very, very common story, unfortunately. That kind of sums up a big part of the inspiration. There is a huge need, a huge demand for a healthier option for our kids. What inspires us is bridging that access gap. So certainly we feel like every student out there deserves a healthy meal. Revolution Foods does focus primarily in underserved schools where there is an even larger access gap. So it's a little bit about us.
So my name is Peter Frickman. I'm the founder of Drip Tech and CEO. Basically, we make low-cost drip irrigation for small farmers in developing countries. And how I got into that, my background's in mechanical engineering, so I did my undergraduate and my graduate work at Stanford. And towards the end of my graduate school, I realized that I really needed to do something that was both engineering intensive and entrepreneurial, but also had a strong social impact. So I was looking for ways to get all three of those, and I was looking at medical device design and a couple other avenues. But ended up getting involved in a course called Entrepreneurial Design for Extreme Affordability at the D School. And this course is starting to get a good reputation for developing, enabling technologies, and notable companies have been founded out of it, such as D-Light and Embrace, and now us as well. I basically, as part of the course, was able to go to Ethiopia and interview farmers, understand a little bit about what their needs were during the dry season, and we saw that they really suffered from water scarcity and needed modern drip irrigation. but the current solutions on the market weren't appropriate. They didn't scale down to fit the needs of these rural farmers. So we looked at what was being done in this space with help from a lot of advisors and partners, and ended up developing a new manufacturing technology, which allows us to make low-cost drip irrigation locally and provide it to them. So I founded the company, actually did a lot of development of our business plan through GSB course, that's 356. And then I just got back from China and India. We've just installed our first 200 systems, 200 farms in a rural village in China, and closed a small round of angel investment.
Great. Russ has a lot to tell.
So I'll try to be brief. And it could be confusing, too, because I could span both the social entrepreneur and the investor side. I was first here in these seats 31 years ago as a business school student. Those of you that are here at the business school may know Dan Rudolph, my classmate, and may have bumped into Steve Ballmer and Rich Fairbanks and some others that were in a fun class that was here. After a number of careers in the Valley, some startups and venture capital, about 11 years ago, I started with a venture capital friend of mine, Legacy Venture. And the thought there was a number of us were donating, and when we donated, a great currency to donate with our tax code is highly appreciated stock. Well, how do you get it other than being lucky? And we decided that if you could get into the best venture funds, they would have a better track record of being able to deliver highly appreciated stock. And all of our investors promised everything they would invest, and whatever became of it, they would give away. And that allowed us to get into the best venture funds. And so we've been able to get investments through them into PayPal and YouTube and Netflix, and hopefully in the future we may get some liquidity with Facebook and Bloom Energy and Silver Spring and Revolution Foods that we're all invested in. So, and all those proceeds will go to the philanthropy of each investor's choice. The second part, though, is we don't believe philanthropy is particularly well understood or practiced. And in fact, what we're talking about today, investing in social entrepreneurs, is one field of that can be vastly improved. And the good news is there's a lot happening. Well, if it can be improved, how do you do it? And our approach, and it's one among many, is to build a safe peer-to-peer community where we can talk among each other about what we're doing. And we hope at the end of the day, not only do we have more to do philanthropy with, but we do a better job. And so some of our investors, so for instance, I'll brag on a few of them, is the Tech Museum. The Tech Museum has anointed Peter here, who humbly didn't put it as a tech laureate, one of the brightest social entrepreneurs around the world. So it actually does come full circle a little bit that there's already an event. So I thought I'd, and another of our investors, Bob Patillo, who runs something called Gray Ghost of Atlanta, is a big investor in D-Light and has been taking that to, so some of our investors are already with it and already doing some things. Others are in process, so we're hoping that would go along. I guess that's enough for a start, other than I'll say that in the value chain there, when you get down to the end of it, we do something unique with our fees. One, we don't have a carry, so that all goes to our philanthropists to give away. And of our fees, we take some of that and we steer it into a 501c3, a public foundation. And we invest that, and this is where the confusing part is. We also have a foundation called Legacy Works, and that's invested in, among other things, Good Capital. And Good Capital is invested in Adina Beverages, started by Greg Stoltenpole, who did Adwala, and is also working on obesity, but more on the campus side, and Better World Books, which some of you may use for recycling textbooks here on campus.
So Russ touches this in many different directions. Okay, so I have a couple of questions for the social entrepreneurs first. Peter, can you give us one example of when the desire for a double bottom line might have conflicted with your profit maximization, and how did you resolve that conflict?
That's a great question. I get this question a lot. I think that we're very fortunate because our product inherently contains the social impact. Our drip irrigation is really an enabling technology for these farmers that lets them grow a second or third crop during the dry season, and increases their income, possibly their nutrition. And so the social impact is really built into our product. And to the extent that we can really maximize our profitability and expand to offer that value proposition to as many people as possible, that's how we see also maximizing our social impact. So we don't really see a trade-off per se between profitability and social impact maximization.
So if I look at this slide here, you're saying because you are in the sort of design and production, it's inherent in your product. You don't have to compromise.
That's the good thing about
So it might be
what we're doing.
interesting for some of you considering social enterprises to think about where you're getting your value from, and is that a tougher way, or is there a higher expense involved in that where these trade-offs might come into play? Because I think Kristen has a similar story to Peter, perhaps.
Well, I think we certainly have it's funny you use that term inherent. I mean, that's Revolution Foods. Our social mission is an inherent in what we do. I mean, we're providing healthier meals and nutrition education to students. Certainly, we've made some choices around which students we focus on. So when we think about, our portfolio of schools, about 80% of the students we serve are low-income students and are qualifying for the free and reduced lunch program. So are dependent upon national and state subsidies. As many of you know, there's an incredible effort led by Michelle Obama right now to significantly increase those subsidies. So that's the most exciting thing going on in our world right now. But it's, certainly a lot of folks look at our product and say, well, you could take this product and charge twice as much as you do and serve it to private school students, for instance. And truthfully, I mean, I'm going to agree with Peter in a way that we have seen a huge opportunity from a business perspective in, serving the students that we serve and really addressing the need in the market sector that we have addressed. And we think, it's not only a great decision socially, but also a really, it's also where a massive opportunity lies for us because it really hasn't been addressed in a great way. And I'm trying to think of other, Chad may be able to give a few specific examples.
That's a really good point, actually. We get questioned all the time, people ask us, can I buy the system in the U.S.?
Yeah.
I want this for my backyard, you should sell this, you can make great margins in the U.S. And, it's true, the first place we got it working was my backyard in Palo Alto. But it's not our focus, and it's not really the market opportunity.
So both of you are choosing to limit your target market to the people who are underserved or less well-served. Go ahead, Jed.
I think I have a little different perspective.
Okay.
And I'll use another company that we're an investor in as an example, but I think it would relate. We're an investor in a company called Seventh Generation, which is a consumer products company with recycled paper towels and diapers and cleaning products and laundry detergents, et cetera. It's about a $150 million company. And I don't even love the term double bottom line or triple bottom line because this slide identifies it wonderfully. We're looking for companies that think about sustainability across everything that they do. And it's not, you can't just do one and not the other. You have to think about it from the broad perspective in order to be authentic in what you're doing. But if you're truly authentic, then you wouldn't buy any of these products, right? If you're truly authentic, you wouldn't have a car. You grow your veggies in your backyard. And so I think that these companies, if they're run appropriately in the way that we like to invest in companies that think about it this way, is that they think about the tension between sustainability and profit and across everything that they do. Because you can't have the most perfect compostable packaging because it may not be the most profitable way to do it, and so maybe you push up a little bit. And on procurement and supply chain, we go out and look at all of the best possible suppliers at Seventh Generation around the world, and there's always kind of a fine line between we want to get the best possible margins we can, but we also, all of it, design, our name, Seventh Generation is, all about thinking through the impact of your decisions on seven generations from now, on production, on delivery, and we're trying to reduce our carbon footprint on target market, and who cares about this kind of stuff? And then we donate 10% of our profits to nonprofit and community causes. So I think that at least in the venture capital world and private company world, you can find pure companies that are authentic in everything that they do. And it's much more difficult to do that with Procter & Gamble or Clorox or General Electric or Walmart that may have interesting initiatives, but they can't change everything they do. They still have to sell their Clorox bleach.
And I have a little follow-up too from my perspective with Revolution Foods. I mean, we're building two things. We're building a financially successful company, and that's really important to us. We're also building a brand that's really important to us. And that brand, ultimately has, as much or more value. And I think it's so important that we make decisions consistent with our brand every single step of the way. And sometimes that may cost more, and sometimes that may be slightly, may affect your margin by a point or whatever it is. But you've got to focus on that brand first and foremost. And for us, that brand, inherent in our brand, is that social mission.
And
So-
all of it is on every one of these steps, at least in my experience, is where do you draw the line? And that gets unbelievably difficult because you can go all the way or you can go halfway or, and we're at Revolution Foods, it's like, we're not all organic, because we can't, because their
Yep.
business model would not hold up.
couldn't
But,
do it.
we don't have any hormones in the meat, and you can talk about the
We've
food
got
quality.
pretty-
So that tension is always there on every step of this chain.
Okay. For the social entrepreneurs again, can you tell us a little bit about how you got funded and how you or continue to get funded? And what were some of the challenges there?
Okay, I'll start. So, we founded after the course ended, so we founded in June 2008. And that summer, we pursued some funding, some financing. We got our first funding in terms of a couple $1,000s of donations, and then a little bit bigger chunk in terms of angel investment. And then since then, we've consistently added angel investors. Once we got our first sales in China last summer, our investors were pretty pleased with us, and they sort of spearheaded a round of angel investment where they reached out to their network of high net worth individuals and wealthy technologists in the Bay Area. And basically through some networking, we ended up raising an angel round. It was pretty interesting because we were only looking for a couple $100,000, and we talked to a lot of people in the sort of social VC space who basically said that we were crazy to try to raise that amount of money because it was sort of too large for angel investors and too small for institutions. But what we saw was that there was really a latent demand for the type of investment that we were providing. And we ended up not having any trouble raising angel capital, and we're in fact heavily oversubscribed in our recent round. So.
Great. So it's funny, I have a very similar story to Peter in terms of where my partner Kirsten and I started. We went to Haas right down the road, and we spent our entire business school focused on building the business plan for Revolution Foods, and that meant not just writing a business plan, but literally being out in the field every single day, meeting with schools and community stakeholders around what we were putting together. We also managed to form a strategic partnership with Whole Foods, which has been phenomenal, and get our first school customers on board. So that was, and really importantly, we launched a pilot program. So I think when I think back to kind of how we got funded in that first step, being able to connect investors with the actual, food and school scene and students really brought it to life. Our first funders were Bay Area Equity Fund, and it's really interesting as you think about business plans that you could start. They were very interested in us, not only for health and wellness, but they have a mandate in their charter that says that they have to invest in companies that promote job creation in low to moderate income areas. Well, a very important part of Revolution Foods, outside of the health and wellness aspect, is our job creation and our commitment to fair jobs, and the fact that we locate ourselves in underserved communities and we have about 250 employees now, 80% of which fit this profile of folks coming from low wage jobs. We pay above livable wage. We offer full health benefits and a chance to own part of our company. So that part of our mission really appealed to them, and they saw an opportunity for job creation, and that was sort of what sealed our seed round. Since then, we've been able to connect with investors like Jed, the Wesley Group, people who are very focused on sustainability, and that's been a fantastic avenue to tell our story and raise money. Most recently, we're seeing some very interesting crossover between the foundation and venture capital world, in the sense that we are, because of of our social mission, we're talking to folks like Kellogg Foundation and Gates Foundation and people out there foundations out there who are really interested in the MRI mission-related investing sector. So I think, once again, if you think about starting a social venture, another plus is you're able to cross those capital worlds that you might not normally be able to do. So that's been a little bit of our story.
Kristen made a great point about the value of a pilot program. Absolutely true in our case as well. We had a functional prototype of our manufacturing technology before we raised any money, and then the first money we raised was really to run a pilot program. And the pilot program led to our first sales, and the sales led to our angel round. It was incredibly important.
Gina, can I ask a slight variation? What role did friends and family play in the very early stages?
We didn't actually happen to have, well, I'd say we had a lot of support from friends and family, especially my family. I guess they invested in a way, sort of supporting some of our expenses and not as a direct investor in the company, but just in sort of a supportive investor in me.
Perhaps the question is, how much have your respective business schools helped you get started? Faculty, classmates, other relationships directly coming out of your business school.
We've definitely had friends and family invest in every round, and that's really important to us. It's certainly helped us along our way and been critical because we're a pretty asset intensive business. We required a little bit more startup capital than our friends and family could put out there. So we did need to secure a more sizable round in the beginning than we could raise from our friends and family. Did want to mention one other thing. Kirsten and I did spend some time in the very beginning thinking about a strategic investment from a large food company. Got pretty far along the way with an investment like that from a big food company, and realized right before they were about to sign the deal, they said, oh, by the way, you have to include 10,000 units of this product that's filled with sugary syrup, whatever. And we're like, okay, we won't be doing that. So I think there are, and thank God we didn't. I mean, it not consistent at all with what we were doing, but another thing to take advantage of, but really be careful of who those first investors are.
So I wanted to ask the investors a question. So the social entrepreneurs come to you full of commitment and passion for their mission. Does that scare you off? How much do you want to hear them talk about the business and the profitability versus the mission? How do you think about how they present it, and also how do you look at the returns? Do you anticipate that there'll be lower returns or slower returns? That'll be take you longer to get your money back.
Yes and yes.
Okay.
And it goes back to what Kristen was saying with one of these. We've started to evolve our thinking, and I'll put on the hats of some of our investors that do this. Although it's still very nascent, it's still very early days. And there are some steps that evolve, especially if you're investing out of a foundation, that have had to be sanctified as a fiduciary wise investor to be able to do that. And for that, you have the emergence of one of the two, what they call TLAs, three-letter acronyms that have been used in the field, MRIs and PRIs. PRIs sort of codify what Gina was heading at with the less than market rate, slower to, so that's something that's aligned with our program. Or if Kellogg were here, I'll get to Kellogg in a second. If they admit offhand that it's not going to be a market rate of return, but because it falls into that basket, they're able to do it. If it is market rate of return, then they can do MRIs, the market rate of returns. And so some of these are part of a continuum. Kellogg thinks market rate of return are market-related investments too weak a word, so they use MDIs, mission-driven investment, as opposed to mission-related investment. And by the way, on all of this, on these asset classes, I'll just make reference to this, and you come down later and look at it or go online. There are two wonderful guides, both freely downloadable at the Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors website. One on MRIs called Philanthropy's Passing Gear, MRIs, and then the most recent one, Solution for Impact Investors, because this name is changing as we go. And in it, especially in this one, this is written by a couple of our investors that do that and edited and also backed by a number of our investors. They have in here a very informative chart that tries to lay out passion area by passion area, whether it's environment or education or curing poverty or obesity or health, whatever it is. What are we seeing evolve as some of the investments you can make across a whole spectrum of asset classes. So whether it's fixed income all the way, and in this case, we're talking about the more risky private equity deals. So that's, I have about 20 copies here if you want to come by later, and I'll even give some to my panelists in case.
And I'll just say that I read this actually, and it was pretty good.
Okay, Jed.
Yeah, well, I
Question
have
was-
two answers. One would be how Catamount looks at it, and one would be, I guess, a little more globally speaking. I mean, Catamount, we're looking for both. We're absolutely looking for world-class, game-changing entrepreneurs and companies that want to change the world in what they're doing, whatever segment that they're playing in, and as well as people that have a tremendous passion and have an authentic, pure view about how they treat their employees and their customers and their packaging and all of it. So I'm not looking for one more than the other. I'm not looking for the idea and then the model. I'm looking for all of them put together. There are plenty of great investors who are more mission-driven, and they could be investing in for-profit or not-for-profit entities, and that's okay. It's just not what we're doing. The reason why we're doing it the way we are is because I think it's a unique time in history in the stuff that we're looking at where you can do both exceedingly well. And there are tremendous opportunities, and I don't think it's a fad. I think this is a long, 10, 20-year movement.
So I think that's
Can
an
I-
interesting point. I just want to hit that one. I think you're right, that there is a period of time right now where you can have the sort of the A-class organizations who are doing the same thing everybody else was doing, but doing it better and cleaner and all of
Right.
that now. And you can cream off the top, and they've got the profits and they've got the mission.
Right.
I wonder how long that'll last before the best ones have been picked off and
From an investment perspective, well, I think it's going to be a while. I don't know. I really do think every sector of our economy is going to change, and I think the new Procter and Gamble's and the new Aramark and Sodexo's, they're going to come from Revolution Foods, and they're going to come from Seventh Generation. They're going to come from emerging companies that will be the powerhouses in 10 or 20 years.
And I think we're expanding not only the definition of what a business is to include more socially responsible concept as an inherent part of the business. So I think that will widen the funnel. And then two, at the same time, we're widening the tap of social entrepreneurs that want to do it. As the infrastructure builds, more are coming into it. I wanted to underscore something Jed said, just so it doesn't get lost. If you do have a social enterprise, and whether you're coming into a hard-nosed, for-profit kind of, we want to make, yes, you have to do good, but we're going to look at you, or the better practitioners that are on maybe the less than market rate of return, they will still, and this is something that we encourage them to do, and these books do too, is still have their business hat on. And so they will look at you and don't say, hey, we're doing great things, do you really care about this stuff? No, they want to know, do you have management? Is your business plan competent? Can you reach a scale at which things can be sustainable and you can operate? So they should be asking the same hard questions, whether it's on the totally social side or the for-profit side. So don't expect to kind of get a pass just because you're doing something good. And
So I want to point something out to everybody. So if you look at this chart here, it's hard to find social entrepreneurs to come on a panel like this because very few call themselves for-profit social entrepreneurs. Either because for investors, they're just calling themselves entrepreneurs, or if or often social entrepreneurs consider themselves, put themselves in the nonprofit bucket. So kind of addressing what both of you, what you're all saying is, social entrepreneurs who are for-profit are addressing both the profit side and the mission side. And so, they cover the full spectrum, so it's a...
It's really interesting from my perspective because just finishing this angel round, we've probably got almost 24 different angel investors at this point. And they come from a very broad range of sort of philosophies with regards to their investment in Drip Tech. But all of them are interested in the financial opportunity as well as the social impact. So, where they fall on the spectrum is different as well. As where social ventures fall on the spectrum.
Do you believe that all problems can be solved with profit maximization? Or are there some that necessarily fall on the other end, on the nonprofit side? I'm going to ask Jed.
Yeah, all problems in the world can be solved by profit.
Well, no, I'm saying, we have found some selection of solutions that are able to accomplish both. So who fits on the other side that can't meet those requirements? those hard double requirements?
Yeah, I think often other great social sectors, many education opportunities become difficult. There's a lot of community service or lower income areas and a lot of finance areas. There's a lot of many segments that would have tremendous benefit, but I think the notion of solving it for profit, even nonprofits need profit. They need cash flow. They need business models. So I think all of them need to be thinking through, as Russ was saying, what they're, how to run an organization.
And if I can add a perspective on that, about a month ago, Lucy Bernholtz, who's a fellow at
Classmate of mine.
A classmate, and there's an interdisciplinary program here at Stanford called Philanthropy and Civil Society, and so she's a fellow associated with that. She would maintain that as you're looking at this spectrum, that it used to be that there was almost a monopoly on the delivery of social value. You had to be a 501c3, you had to be pure nonprofit. And she would maintain that one of the big revolutions that's really not particularly understood or well recognized, but is going on in a major way right now, is that monopoly is now broken. And there are emerging different forms of organization. One of them you may hear called L3C, which is a low-profit LLC. And as regular for-profit companies say, no, we can do social value, and because we do that, we can actually do a better job of recruiting employees because they'll like our mission, or we'll get more inspiration out of them, or we can attack certain things that you're going to see that social value being delivered across a much broader spectrum. So that monopoly has been broken. I do think, by the way, that even though it's broken, there will still be some efforts that have to be tackled by pure humanitarian efforts. But it will be much more of a spectrum than it's been.
I was just taking an extreme position. Okay. Okay, let's say I'm an individual investor, okay, and I have a bucket of money that I think of as my philanthropic dollars, and I have a bucket of money that I invest for gain. And now I see this really cool company that is doing mission as well as profit, and maybe there's a little trade-off that I have to make. Am I going to take, if I want to invest in them, am I going to take those dollars out of my philanthropic bucket, or am I going to take it out of my investment bucket? How should people think at an individual and also at an organizational level? How do you think, where are those dollars coming from for those companies that maybe aren't able to do both as well, but are having to fall in the gray area a little bit? Is there a new spot in the middle?
There is, I think, but it's going to be slower to evolve on the individual side, except for the fact that, I mean, if you look at venture capital and the way that's evolved, and that really is sort of the institutionalization of investing in small dynamic entrepreneurs. On the social side, we're not yet there where we have organized funds, or in my case, a fund of funds that can invest in that. And part of that, I think, is structural. There may not be enough, if you may be doing a great job on obesity, but you don't touch environment, or you don't touch poverty, or you may touch all, but which bucket do you belong in? And so you can't really aggregate enough of these together to aggregate the investors to be able to do it. So I think the bulk of the capital, and this is still a little bit of a game to watch, is coming from foundations, as you may have heard that they're mandated to give away the 5%. But the other 95%, there's a fellow that was here at Stanford, Jen Emerson, that would say if you don't deploy that 95% of that corpus that you have, it becomes morbid capital, just deadly, just sitting there, and may even fight against your mission that you're trying to accomplish. So can you mobilize that 95%? And I think there's enough of building groundswell in that you're going to see some foundations, not just right now, there are a few signature ones that have come over, but I think there's more with Kellogg's entrance and Tom Rees, who's just going gung-ho at this. He's going to give courage to others. So it's really growing from just a very narrow wedge. Still early, but I'm convinced that will be our first group that will do it.
I mean, the reason I ask about the individual is it's the individual who funds eventually into the venture capital funds that then make those decisions. And until the individual is willing to make some trade-offs, the fund has to abide by whatever the investors want.
Yeah, I'm not, the reason why I started a venture capital fund was because of this dynamic. So I made a bunch of money, and then I started doing angel investments. So I get like 20 business plans, and, how'd you do it, and will you help, and can you invest and advise? And I'd make like, 4 or 5 investments. And it's crazy. It's crazy. You're not professional. So at Catamount, we look at 1,200 business plans a year, and we invest in 2 or 3 companies. And so, I think that there are professionals that do this on both the social, not-for-profit side as well as on the for-profit side. And I'm not a big fan of angel investing. I think that you're just going to be taking bets. It takes not just money, it takes a lot of money in some cases to get these companies going, and angels typically don't have it. It takes a lot of energy and work and advice and experience. I mean, it's just like you got to get in there and help these folks out. I mean, they're working their ass off, and it's not easy, and so anything it takes. So I think for individuals, I would say go find a great manager that you believe in, or go find a great foundation, or go find a great fund of funds that has the similar philosophy that you want to achieve.
Okay,
I'd say, let me just say, the flip side to that
Defending the angel
is
investors.
often, what kind of capital is stage appropriate, right? So, we actually did get bounced around between, within organizations, from the foundation to the business development, category, back and forth. Oh, you don't quite fit here, go over there, go over. And, as a startup, you need to move quickly, and angels can move quickly. So, obviously, as we look at, who's going to take us the distance, and how we're sort of framing up our A round, we need institutions that can provide that additional value add.
Right.
But I was very pleased with our angels and sort of that tactic in general.
Well, I mean, the comment basically is that the venture capital community you would think is great risk takers, but it is so unbelievably conservative. And typically, as an entrepreneur and having raised money for 3 companies, I mean, they show us the business plan, show us the customers, show us your product, show us the team, show us everything, and then we'll maybe think about investing. You're like, I just got to get this thing off the ground. So, our motto at Catamount is nothing's too early for us. I mean, we're looking for an entrepreneur and a business plan to get going because of that dynamic that angels can get in there and be more nimble when entrepreneurs need that help.
Yeah, that's
And-
great.
and foundations-
More VCs should be like that.
And if VCs are conservative, foundations would consider VCs mavericks.
Yeah.
Because even though there's a philosophical view that says we as a society allow foundations to exist, and they ought to be society's risk capital, that they ought to do some of these pioneering things. But yet foundations themselves are very conservative, and especially if you're sitting in a program office, if we force our program officers at foundations to make these decisions, they almost believe that there's this barrier that they should never cross, which is to be so close to a venture capitalist believes they need to be close to an investment. Program officers need to believe they need to be hands-off, so they're dispassionate. And that there's a very big cultural divide.
And as much as they may think of venture capitalists as mavericks, I mean, is so conservative what I do compared to what these guys are doing. They're 110% in one company. I have 10, that are, going up and down at different times. I've done that. I know what being a maverick is like. It's hard.
so I want to ask, how do all of you measure social or environmental return? And how do you, why don't we start with that? How do you measure that?
I think for us, we take our standards that we're feeding to our students every day and try to really benchmark those against, standards that we believe in. I mean, for instance, it was great for us because Robert Wood Johnson, which is obviously one of the kind of leading foundations in terms of health and wellness, their obesity commission, which looked at schools, came out with their kind of top 10 recommendations of what they would do to change American schools if they could, the food programs in American schools, and we kind of cross-checked those. I mean, to a T, that's, had been Rev Food's standard operating approach with our schools in terms of the food standards and the nutrition education that we've been providing since inception. But we think about those standards really, really carefully, implement them every day. And then really for us, it's a matter of scale, right? So if we can we grew from 500 meals to 50,000 meals in the last 4 years across 4 markets. And, we look at those meals going out the door every day and the fact that these are students where these are their reliable meals of the day. If you think about serving breakfast, lunch, and snack, it's a lot of calories for the students we're serving. So we measure it in terms of scale and impact.
Are you measuring the impact on obesity?
Well, so we don't have a technical sort of research partner. We're not equipped internally to be taking BMIs and weighing students, et cetera, but we may go that direction. What we have right now is an amazing amazing depth of testimonials from our schools around students losing. An executive director the other day just told me, literally sees his students slimming down before his eyes, students with increased attention to class in the afternoons, less disciplinary action on the playground because they've had a balanced, well-nourished lunch instead of kind of spiking up and down. We hear stories all the time, every day, almost a testimonial comes in around a student bringing a healthy eating practice home to his or her parents. So we think about when you're trying to build lifelong healthy eating habits, we are amassing those testimonials and using them to go out there and obviously scale our program and market our program. And we're looking at that impact day in and day out.
It's tough to get hard measurement, but you've got the good anecdotal stories.
We've got great anecdotes, and we actually have had multiple schools in the last year say, just yesterday from Colorado, a principal saying, our test scores have gone up. We've had the biggest jump in test scores we've had since we founded this school, and the one tangible difference I know happened from last year was my switch to Revolution Foods. That came in from Axel Academy yesterday in Colorado. Now, I don't have Harvard backing me up on that, but I guess, those stories are, Stanford, that's right, I'm so sorry, my gosh, I should say Haas. I don't know why I'm not saying that. But anyways, I think that's, I say that because Planet Health at Harvard's been reaching out to us about doing a study. But I think that's really, really important that we look at it.
Peter?
For us, obviously Kristen touched on this a lot, is that, metrics and measurement is hard, and there's always a million things to do. So it's really a balance of what is sort of appropriate, both from, the needs of the company to measure their effectivity and make sort of course corrections, the needs in terms of marketing and delivering information to our investors and stakeholders. For us, because as I said, the social impact is really in the product. Our key metric is really the number of customers that we can attract. Because since we're selling this profitably, it's really about the value proposition that we're providing to these customers, that they're willing to pay their own money to purchase it, and that's a big credential. So that's really kind of like our metric, and we think about how are we going to get the maximum number of farmers.
If they can pay for it, then they're getting a greater return.
Right, they're making their own economic decisions. They're saying this value proposition makes sense for me. It's an investment, and then that's the sort of the ultimate metric for us.
Well, that one's easier than some of the others. How about you, Jen?
Yeah, well, we encourage it in every one of our companies, and are doing it ourselves. In fact, we're just redoing our website to highlight the impact of what we're doing. And so I think it's a very important question, and the ways of measuring success are increasingly more scientific and more difficult and extremely important. So, I was just listing a couple of our companies, but at Verdium, they have a power management software company that shuts down big networks of PCs to save energy costs, and part of their value proposition is the carbon emission reduction, and they save 40,000 tons of reductions just from Citigroup alone by using their product. And Seventh Generation has a whole area on their website where they're very public about the impact of using their products, that people that used to use the paper towels that have bleach and chemicals that are polluting all these rivers, there's that many tons that are no longer doing that. At Revolution Foods, and the number of kids, how many meals have you served now? 1.5 million? Or?
7 million.
7 million. Okay, so they're fast. They're growing fast. There's a company called Pure Sense we're looking at that puts monitors in the ground to help farmers figure out whether they're using enough water in different parts of their farms. And it's interesting that in the end they don't save water, but they increase the yield by having more water go here and less go there. And so I think these kinds of measurements are critical.
And if you think it was tough to do the measurement at the individual level, put yourself in the seat of someone that's trying to do multiple ones of these. I think on the radio today, I was listening to some foundation that was an underwriter, and they had what sounded like a nice, simple tagline. It was something like, to bring about a cleaner, healthier, and more peaceful planet, or something like that. Well, any one of those things, you could have a metric for each one of them, and it'd be tough to do. Some of the ones that focus in, and Energy Foundation has done them, they'll try to measure how many tons of sulfur dioxide did they take out? And so they'll try to get a monolithic measure of what they do. But it's very tough. And it's still an early discipline that investors are putting into this area. One of the better efforts is actually promoted by a Stanford graduate, Jacqueline Novogratz, who runs Acumen Fund, who's grabbed a bunch of the free time of Google engineers and put together a portfolio management tool that allows them to not just keep track of the investments and the returns, but what are they doing on the social measure. And so she's got something like that, and about 5 of my investors are working on that tool and using it in a beta site. But even if you have a tool, and even you're starting to measure something, just to give you a sense of how painful this is or how tough it is, the early efforts start to measure activity. Did we feed someone, or did we feed them less, sugar than they had before, right? Well, then, once you get that under control, you start to say, well, that's good. Let's look at efficiency or productivity. How many meals per square dollar, or how many meals per full-time equivalent person. How are we doing effectiveness of what so not just are we feeding people, but are we doing it with the resources we have? All right, well, that's good. That's still a point in time. How about effectiveness? If we're trying to actually eliminate obesity, or we're trying to get people off poverty, are we reaching that goal? And so, number of bed nets delivered and number of, all these things are good indicators, but toward an end. And we're still struggling as a sector for how to move to an ultimate measurement. And even when you get to that, how do you do it in a cost-effective way so it doesn't burden your grants too much so that it becomes unproductive to even do that? So put that into context for you. The good news is there's good stuff happening, but it is a tough process.
Okay. So how do you two protect your mission? You've got this great social value inherent in your product, but you could sell it. Peter could sell his drip irrigation for more in the U.S. He could maybe cut some corners on some manufacturing. Kristen could add in Kraft mac and cheese to reduce her costs. How do you make sure that long term your mission is protected? Maybe if you're no longer with the organization or something.
Wow, that's really tricky. That's something that
Ben and Jerry struggled with this
we're
one.
trying to figure. And I met one of the guys at Ben and Jerry's at Net Impact and talked to him about it a little bit. I don't know if I have an answer to that. I think that the key is in the team that you attract, and then trying to build your brand to be consistent with the mission, so that it's. Russ gave me a hint. It's building your company culture. So yeah, that has to do with the brand and the team and just the day to day. So that if you sort of step back, hopefully you've got it to the point where things kind of run on their own.
And I'll add to brand and team, to also to investors. I think it's so important that you've got investors that are aligned with what you're trying to accomplish. You're not just waffling back and forth constantly. So that's been a really important part of building our company. Definitely agree with team, and I go back to brand as well. I sat in the room with a large competitor yesterday, and the reason they are so interested in talking to us at our tiny little, they said, we have 250 employees. They have 250,000 employees. That was like the first comparison of the slides. But the reason it's all about brand, right? It's the fact that if we, everything we've built around our social mission and who we serve and the standards that we have and why we think that's important and the demand that's created in the marketplace, that's all wrapped into Revolution Foods, the brand, and that's what's given us, the value that we have, or the value that we're building, obviously. So that's how we protect it. It's what we are. It's who we are.
Quick comment. I think one of the most important things we do as investors is to ensure the alignment of interests. And it's not just on the mission, in case it's a mission company, but it's on everything, on exits, on growth, on making sure that you have everyone around the board, everyone around the team, as much as possible, going down the same path with the same mission, thinking about what the company wants to achieve. And as soon as you start inserting people that have their own stuff that they want to throw in, or their own needs that are different, it falls apart. So you need to as much, but you can't get them completely in line, because people have their own personal stuff, and I have my investors, they want returns, and so there's just the interests are going to be out of line a little bit, so I would just say as much as possible.
And I'm going to ask one more question and then open it up to the floor. So we have two very ideal social enterprises here who say that they don't need to manage the conflict between profit and mission because it's inherent in their product. I would contend that that is not always the case, that there are plenty of cases where you have to make trade-offs, and you have to sacrifice some amount of profit to achieve your mission. I think a good example of that is if you're trying to, if we go back to this slide, in the employment side of things, if you're trying to employ, one of your parts of your mission is employing disabled or employing people who were previously unemployable, you put something into your cost structure that raises your cost. So there's a number of times you're going to have to make a trade-off depending on where your value is. So for those kinds of organizations, what advice would you two investors have for them? Where do they go? How do they position it? They may not be able to maximize profits. They may have slightly lower returns. What should they do?
Well, as I said earlier, I think they absolutely have to make those sacrifices and decisions every single day. So I think that, whether it's packaging or what food, I'm sure you deal with it all the time. So what food ingredients are you going to put in, and what are the healthiest possible solutions? You may not be able to actually do that. So, no, I agree with you.
Okay.
And the only thing I'd add is as Jed would say, things change. They change in fundamental ways. You can't even predict necessarily how the market or the competition is. And so your ultimate sort of comfort as an investor is probably the management team. And to the extent that they're able to have a compass and a culture that's going in the direction you feel comfortable with. And that's why it's not just show us a great business plan, show us a great market. It's let us get comfortable with that team, and that you're going to hire the right people that will continue to grow in that. And so that's why I think good investors do spend time trying to understand the character of the management team that they're with.
So
Maybe
are
even
there
actually-
investors who, you believe there are investors who will take less return in exchange for more social impact?
Yeah.
Yes. And where are they? Who are they?
Well, I mean, there are some that have very clear mission-oriented funds. There's a seafood fund, and there are people that are very, very focused on very specific sectors that may not have the best possible returns, but they care about that sector.
And their investors know that. The investors in the fund know in advance that they're making that trade-off.
Well, I don't know. You probably see.
Yeah, there
Those
aren't
kinds.
as many. I mean, it's still a small part, but there are some.
They're small,
The DBL fund, what was first the Bay Area Equity Fund, now called DBL, is one of those.
Is this a growing segment of the capital market or not? I guess if you say, it used to be that all mission stuff came out of nonprofits. And we're seeing a trend, perhaps, well, maybe I can actually run it as a for-profit. I'm still primarily mission, but I've got a good revenue stream. My profits aren't going to be as high.
Yeah.
I think I should make a go of it. That's great. We want them to go for it. So where do they go for funds, and how do we make a capital market that works for them?
Yeah, I think. I feel like you're talking very broadly about socially focused, funds, and and so there are a lot of them. They're smaller, they're emerging, but I think that what I'm seeing is more funds that are kind of doing the kinds of things that we are, that see fantastic capital opportunities that also happen to have great returns. My fear is that some of the socially oriented ones may overpromise the returns, focusing on mission, and then their investors will be unhappy, and then that money will dry up. So I do think this can be a turning point, and it's all a matter of setting the right expectations.
Okay, questions? Yes.
So, how do you sell an idea or your vision of change to someone who is likely has everything they need, right? I mean, likely is not affected by the problem you're trying to solve, going to a different country that maybe they've never been there before, right? So how do you do that?
Pictures are good.
Stories.
Stories. I think that you do have to find ways to connect the person you're selling, whether it's your investor or just the person you're talking to. I mean, water, food, it's pretty simple. People share these needs around the world, and they can empathize with people around the world that don't have access to those. So
I guess I would say market opportunity. I mean, if you're going into someone and saying, I see a market opportunity that looks like X, and you're able to, back that up, and at the same time, talk about what an incredible social impact you would have. I think those are the two strongest factors that you can talk to an investor about. So it's just a quick addition.
yeah, it depends on the audience.
Yeah, it depends on the audience.
Okay.
Well, it goes back to an earlier conversation about how important it is to get interests in line, get investors that care about your mission,
Yeah.
get board members that care about your mission,
Yeah.
get employees that care about your mission. So if you're talking to someone that doesn't care about it, then you're talking to the wrong person. So you want to, as much as possible, qualify before you go in that meeting, so you're not wasting your time.
And I think of our company as sort of a whole picture of for-profit and social impact. And there are some people that we talk to that only want to hear about part of that, and that's fine. That's their prerogative.
Okay. Yes.
Hey, my name is Martijn. I'm from Amsterdam, from the Netherlands, from Europe, and it's very nice to be here and to see your very inspiring companies and keep on the good work, because I can use the food as well. I have a question actually for Jet. You were talking about that you have companies which give 10% of their profit to non-profit organizations or social responsibility institutes. In what way do you choose these charities, and in what way do you promote this as a company?
We promote it on, this is seventh generation that does that in particular, and there are a few others that have gotten to scale where they can do it, but seventh generation has been a leader in this area, and it's actually a pretty significant number, 10%. And they put it on every package of every product that they sell, and they have an internal foundation team that takes in requests for donations that fall across three different sectors. One is their local community where they're based in Burlington, Vermont. The other is sustainable environmental mission kinds of companies, and they also, and as important for seventh generation, is the health impact. So they look at health cures.
Okay.
I'm James Masih from Indonesia. And then I'm interested to join this program, social entrepreneur, because I have been doing social entrepreneur for 6 years. And then I think this is a little bit different from what you just talked about. You know that our country, Indonesia, already been applied a green revolution since 1967 in order to increase the productivity. Until 1984, we already surplus of rice, but after that, the productivity declined until now. This is because there's a lot of synthetic chemical applied in our soil, and even pesticide. And then it already damaged the soil. Now our organic soil is already, on average, below 1.75. So it means, even though we increase the chemical fertilizer or whatsoever, the productivity will decline. I just want to ask you about the revolution food.
Yes.
Is that related to green revolution or?
Well, I certainly
or
think.
related to organic food supply?
Definitely. So I didn't get a chance to state our food standards, but I mean, our food standards, all of our meats and dairy products are hormone and antibiotic free. We use fresh fruits and vegetables in every meal. We don't use any added preservatives or high fructose corn syrup, which is in so much of the processed food that you see everywhere. But really, we focus on fresh, home style food. Now, as Jed said, we're not able to do 100% organic, but to the extent that we can work with local farmers and use seasonal produce and, source from our local community, we do that, and we have a really, really strong commitment to doing that. So I do think it's similar in the sense that we're trying to get, more fresh food into our communities, and in most cases, these are very underserved communities. So, very, very closely related.
Okay, over here.
Hi, it's been a great panel. I'm an Ashoka Fellow, and I'm creating a high transparency ethical bank. I actually understand how to blend, as part of our underwriting, both sides, or all sides, Jed, of the impacts that enterprises have. I guess my question is really simple. We're living through dual crises, a climate crisis and a banking crisis. And I just wonder, at what point you are affected, whether yet, because you're so young, or you see your growth being affected by the constraints in the bank liquidity system. You can talk about equity all you want, but you'd like to be able to scale it, I think, with bank debt of some flavor or another to get to the leverage you need. What are you experiencing? What are you fearful? How are you going to use that opportunity space?
Are you up and running? We have some companies that would love some venture debt.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I guess one thing to note would be that our investment that we've raised so far is actually all in the form of convertible debt, although that's not institutional debt, but that's something that we're looking hopefully forward to in the future. The trick is, even before the current financial climate, finding commercial debt that was available for our types of ventures was incredibly difficult. So I haven't seen a real shift, because it's, finding somebody who can finance, say, our product that's being shipped around, and capital investments in other countries for manufacturing facilities and that kind of thing. I'm not sure that that's really well developed yet, regardless of the financial climate.
So even OPIC or any of that is not impact. Overseas private investment or any of that kind of.
We haven't really gotten to that kind of level yet, but we will. We'll be exploring all kinds of any kind of way that we can balance our capital with debt and equity.
So we're actually at an interesting stage where we are considering debt. We've had we had a strategic loan from Whole Foods and some great kind of small debt along the way, but we are finding a lot of appetite at this juncture for no pun intended, but for what we're doing in the stage we're at, given our growth and kind of how our operations and financials look. One of the most promising things I think for us is looking at as we grow into new markets, more beneficial financing structures, debt structures that come from the job creation, for instance, that we will contribute to that community if we are able to go in and start building a culinary center and serving the students in that community. So I'd love to answer that question in a year, but I'm feeling good about the opportunities that exist right now.
I think the debt market for earlier stage companies is completely cyclical. When everything's going up and to the right, there's plenty of it available. And as soon as there's a contraction, they're the first to grab capital back and in many ways can kill a company. Probably good for the bank's business model, but debt can be extremely risky. And so in 1999 and 2000, there was more debt than you can imagine that was available at unbelievably favorable terms. And in 2002, it was absolutely the worst business to be in, and they were just walking around sweeping cash out of companies just to be able to cover themselves. And then in 2004 and 5 and 6, it started to kind of pick back up again, and you're seeing a lot more term sheets, and then it started to pull back. And so I think the short story is that as companies and as investors and board members, you need to be extremely thoughtful about when you take it on, because the last thing you want is to break a covenant and then everything gets ruined. And the loaners need to be extremely thoughtful about it as well. So I think it's a tough industry.
Yes.
Been advised recently as I was considering a social venture to, just like with any venture, stay very, very focused on solving a specific pain. And I'm curious to hear from both the founders and from the financing side how important you see it is to stay focused, where you see a broader market, and how do you stick to the focus, or do you go broad earlier too? You guys don't mind touching on that?
I'll take that. I think that something that was really pretty critical for us was that we didn't really set out to start a company. We set out to solve a problem. So, when I met these farmers that needed low-cost drip irrigation, I saw an opportunity to develop a manufacturing technology that would solve that problem. And without thinking about a business model or a plan or market or anything like that, I went out and did solve the problem and got sort of our functional prototype. And then only when we sort of realized what we'd done, did we start to consider, well, wow, this might have some legs beyond just a project, just a technology. This could become a company. And so I definitely believe that focus is incredibly important.
Good.
I think it's critical. We had a really interesting moment at Revolution Foods where we started up with our focus on schools and health and wellness, and sure enough, our strategic partner Whole Foods came to us and said, we love the mission behind this company. We feel like consumers would buy into the mission behind this company, and so we'd like for you guys to launch a consumer products line. And Kira and I looked at each other and said, wow, this is something, great opportunity, something we have very little experience in, and it could be an entire operating division right now of our company. And I think we were 1 year old, maybe we were 9 months old. I mean, we were really young when they first approached us. So we, took a good hard look and powwowed with our investors and board and, decided it just makes more sense to form a strategic partnership on this and have some experts who are really, really good at this help us develop this and innovate this and really make this successful. And that's when we partnered with Nest Naturals. And so I just have a very tangible example of kind of who can go off course.
I want to take a slightly contrarian view because I've been in a number of startups as well. And as Jed was talking about cycles, if you are in a good cycle and the money is available and the opportunities are available, I would say you don't know. When you start a company, you don't know exactly if you're on the right focus.
Right.
And if a great opportunity comes your way and you have the resources to go after it, sometimes, I was with, there's a for-profit, VeriSign, when there was, $80,000 in revenue. We didn't know what was going to work. And we had enough money and we were at a really good time. We could try 5 different business models. And we tried them all. And, 3 or 4 of them worked. And I don't think we would have been successful had we just stuck with the very one thing that we'd started with. So it's a cyclical thing and an opportunity. But I think generally you do want to be super focused. But I think there are times when you can be opportunistic and go for it.
That's a healthy
Yeah.
way to look at it. I think
Yeah.
we highly encourage everyone to be really focused on who's your target customer, what are you offering them, are you satisfying them, and the reason why Kristen and Kirsten were able to say, we can't do the consumer product stuff was because what they were focused on was doing so unbelievably
Right,
there was
well,
just
and there was
so
an
much.
enormous market, and they proved
already
it.
knew that.
They knew it. They're like, let's just go that way.
Yeah.
We're good at it, and let's make those people happy. This may be great, but we have enough of a big business there. All the while, having a company that has a culture of innovation, of experimenting, that doesn't squash that, but still, it's a perfect example.
I think often in the case that I'm thinking of, we had more of a technology, right? Which is which could be more like Peter's case. You have a technology, you think it's going to apply here. There might be multiple uses, and you need to kind of try them out.
Right. And similar
Very
on VeriSign, I don't know if you worked with Dana Evan, but the
Yes.
former CFO of VeriSign is on the board of a company with me called Second Life Linden Lab, which is a company that I started with another guy 10 years ago. And that company was a platform like VeriSign, and a platform you're really trying to do everything, or actually you're trying to not do anything, you're trying to just do the platform, so everybody can do everything on top of it. And so that dynamic of, are you a product, are you a platform, are you a company, how big is the market? If you're just a product, is it a big enough market to really warrant, putting your energy towards it? Is a very interesting dynamic depending on what you're looking at. And the last thing you want is someone to come in that says, I'm the Google for eBay with, just, you don't want to try to do everything at once.
Gene, if I can add one more thing, just to Joel's point. You may be going through it the first time, or maybe the second time, but this is a plug for Jed and his crew. They've probably seen hundreds of these things, some of them unsuccessful, and if you look at if they look through to the 1,000 business plans per year, it may not be your business, but isomorphically, there's kind of progressions of growth, and when do you add, and when do you get more capital, and when do you do it? They have kind of a lot more judgment in how to do that. So you may not have that, they may not have that. That's one of the real value added. He's not just money, he's experience and wisdom that comes alongside to say, it's time to think about, I know we're watching every dollar, but now's the time to invest in the sales force, and now's the time to invest in, they're going to have that. And so don't be afraid to say, I don't know, but someone on my advisory board should know.
Yeah.
And really, really think about investors with operating experience.
Yes.
Really, really do that.
Yeah.
I started something as a 501c3 because I thought it would allow me to focus on the mission, which is to improve the employability and job success of U.S. military veterans. Since that time, I've discovered that there's a huge market opportunity, getting a lot of good receptivity from companies that say, look, we'll pay you to provide services staffed by veterans working from their homes. And so this, all of a sudden I'm finding, oh man, maybe I made the wrong decision about, maybe I restricted or limited myself in unnecessary ways by making this a 501c3. So I'm finding myself in a position where the gift shop is bigger than the museum. And so what do I do now? We're not solving world hunger, so it's not as compelling. And where do we find capital to fund? We're looking to fund a pilot, to basically bring in some key people and make this thing, create a sustainable delivery model so we can show up as credible providers. And so I'm kind of stuck in this limbo. We need financing, but how do you do that when you're kind of stuck?
Have you written a plan?
Yeah.
A for-profit plan.
Yes and no. I mean, it's tilted toward the social impact,
Right.
but it definitely highlights where the earned income is really going to sustain.
I've always found that, at least in my experience as an entrepreneur, and definitely as an investor, but as an entrepreneur, that as soon as you start writing, then you know what you know and you know what you don't know. You start asking yourself, how big is the market? What do I charge? How many people care about it? What else do they care about? What's their pain? Am I solving it? Am I solving it in a unique way that other people can't when they get into it? And then you start kind of asking that, and then out of that, you'll get more conviction about whether it's an enormous opportunity or medium or small, and who might be the best possible people to reach out to that care about the kind of thing that you're trying to solve.
You might want to write two plans. One that's on the for-profit side and see how, and kind of push through the tough questions on that from that perspective, and one the other way, and you see kind of which one makes more sense. You could also shop both of them, but. Other question? Yes. Last one.
This one's for Peter, actually. I'm just curious how you actually went about reaching your customers in such rural areas as far as marketing and distribution.
Yeah, that's a great question. So obviously, when you're trying to distribute a product in India or China, that's a huge challenge. For our pilot studies, it was pretty easy. We basically just showed up and started kind of looking weird and walking around, and people kind of came out of their houses and said that they'd try our drip irrigation. But obviously, like as we prove the product and need to scale that up, we're looking at commercial distribution channels, nonprofit organizations. Our first sale in China was actually to a rural government, which basically we came to them and said, They provide a lot of the inputs for these local farmers. They're kind of the primary stakeholder, and so they were very interested in getting the farmers to increase their income and reduce inputs. So that was kind of like a first sale, and an interesting business model in China. In India, we probably want to work more with commercial distribution channels. And it turns out that, even the most rural farmers that we've met with, they still have access to the seeds and fertilizer and hardware that the large-scale farmers have access to. So those are the channels we're looking at.
So, and to respect everybody's time, we'll end the panel. I imagine panelists are willing to stay for a few minutes if any of you want to come down and ask any other questions. Thank you.